Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski.
Today on the podcast, we're back in Ohio with a runner who ran all the way through the 70s, has competed with some of the other people we've interviewed on the podcast, friends with them, lots of stories that you'll enjoy meeting. Welcome on the podcast, Ted Rupe.
Thank you much.
Ted, let's introduce everybody with your competitive running origin story. When, how, and why did you get into your first competitive race?
That's a great question. In my high school, we had a coach who ended up being my coach when I was in high school, but I was sitting in, I think, 7th grade looking out the window. Our junior high was at a different location than the high school, and they were doing track practice behind the junior high building. I just watched these guys running laps and had their stocking hats on and the baggy cotton sweats on. And I go, man, that looks like something I'd like to try someday. And sure enough, it's just one of those things that just grows on you. You watch it and it became fascinating to me. I think what I really liked was the improvement I could see as a direct relation to the effort that I put into the training.
Do you remember anything about your first race or first season?
Yeah. I ran track in junior high, and the races, I think it was a quarter mile. That was just something that was more like a field day I got thrown into. But I remember my early cross country or road race experiences were really unique. In fact, I'll call this my first race. I jumped in a road race. This would have been probably late 60s, 68, 69. It was in Niles, Ohio. And there was a local hero, Les Nagy was his name. He'd run a 9:01 2-mile. I think he did that in 1970, actually. But they had a road race and Les was there and I got to meet him. I think all of us at some point have this person that we watched and followed and said, I want to be like this guy. And that was it. And I jumped in this race with Les. I think I was 6th place or something, but I was only like a freshman in high school. I've always loved to follow the people that are a little bit better and a little bit faster and watch. And I think that's how our sport develops, by the domino effect. We watch and then we pass on what we learned.
What was your personal attitude toward competition? Had you played other sports, and how driven were you, and how did you handle, we'll get into details of real races and higher level competitions, but how did you handle success and failure in competition as a youngster?
Yeah, I was very, and I'm thinking this is probably true for everyone. I thought everyone else was very confident. And I was this kid that went in scared of every race and sure that everybody was better than myself. But I learned that it was something that I was reasonably good at. And I started beating some of my teammates and got better and better. And the defeats, they always bothered me when I'd run a bad race. But I really, in retrospect, look back at my bad races as possibly my biggest growth experiences, because you could really learn so much from, oh, this is why I had a bad race. And no, a very good learning experience for me.
Let's talk about what it was like. I think you have a pair of shoes there. Let's talk about what equipment was like and training, coaching, probably the complete ignorance of value in nutrition. Maybe not. How was it back then?
No, I absolutely. Again, I started my freshman year in high school is when I was on my first cross country team. And the fall of 1969 was my freshman year. And so I was in the bubble leading into the 70s when things changed extremely rapidly. My dad wanted me to play basketball, but I was terrible. So I started running in the Chuck Taylor high tops. And you think about that, and you think, yeah, I don't know how I did that, but I'd go run 2 or 3 miles in those. And that's what I did. I remember the first time we got a pair of running shoes, I think was my junior year that I got a pair. And it was a leather Cortez. I just wore these things and wore these things. I showed you before the show started, but I wore the heels up. I was wearing is why I had to finally put these things on the shelf. But I just loved the running shoes. And I just kept those to show people how we didn't know what we were doing. If somebody handed us something and said, okay, this will make you a better runner, you we used it. And it was just the growth in knowledge and experience, especially in the early 70s, was just incredible. We just stood on guys' shoulders that went before us and hoped that we could plow some new territory in what we were doing.
What kind of coaching did you have in school?
Yeah, that I mentioned Oscar Grant was his name, and he was a World War II veteran, but before he went to World War II, he placed in a state meet in Ohio. He ran a 4:42 or something like that mile back in probably 1939 or 1940. And then he got out of the war and he went into teaching and he ended up being my coach. I didn't realize it, but I was very fortunate to have a coach that had experience because that wasn't often the case in that era. Anybody that was assigned to coach track and cross country usually came from a completely different background. They didn't necessarily know anything about distance training. So I was fortunate and he had me on a good training program. And I just always give him a lot of credit because he inspired my career completely.
When did you get to the higher levels of competition, advancing through regional and other meets in track or cross country? And were you aware of it before you showed up at your first big meet?
It's interesting you'd even ask that question because no, really didn't know what was going on. I remember my freshman year in high school, I went to the districts. I don't think they let me compete. Mr. Grant took me as a spectator and I watched and I was just, I think, oh my God, to me, it was like the Olympics. It was that much excitement in the whole thing. Then I did get to compete my sophomore through senior years and I was bouncing back and forth between the mile and the 2 mile in track and cross country. It was 2 miles in Ohio, at the time. And I did pretty well. I qualified for state my junior and senior year for both track and cross country. My senior year I ended up winning, but my best times were very modest. I was 9:43 for a 2 mile and 4:26 for the mile. What was it? Frank Schroeder, everybody was a 4:30 miler. And I was just one of those guys.
What awareness did you have of the competition that was going on in the state? This before the internet, Ohio, that was a kind of a hotbed of running and it was popular. How popular was it? What
Yeah.
was the press coverage? How much attention did you get as a successful athlete in a minor sport? What was the status of cross
Yeah.
country and track?
We were fortunate. Our press coverage was directly related to who the local newspaper had. And to begin with, they had somebody that was only interested in major sports. So we got very little coverage. And you're right, there wasn't much information out there. We had a Ohio publication called Ohio Track and Field News or something like that. It was one of those early, like it ended up being like the national one was a completely separate one, but it was much like that. This guy would collect information. I think Ed Shea was his name. And he would just make hundreds of phone calls around the state, get the information and publish rankings. I would subscribe to that. And I just wanted to get my name in that someday. And eventually it happened. But it's just that whole evolution of how we got information. Now, I went on to coach. I coached for 35 years at the high school level. But to begin with, that's what I was doing. I'd have people at each corner of the state and I'd call them, okay, who did this and how fast did because you had no other way to get the information. And now, click of a button, we're watching the everything live as it happens. But what a change it's been.
Let's talk about your identity as a runner. Early success, you enjoyed it. When did it occur to you that your identity was, I am a runner. I'm going to do this longer. And then the broader horizons of university or post high school, how'd that happen in your psyche?
Yeah, I was fortunate. We have a family farm. In fact, it's been since my great great grandmother's husband was killed in the Civil War. She bought this house, got remarried, and I live in the house now. We have a 170-acre farm, but it's a very rural community. And none of my family had ever attended college. So it wasn't even on my radar to think about that. I was just running just because I guess it raised my popularity or whatever in high school. But then all of a sudden I started thinking maybe I could do this at the collegiate level. And I made a decision. This is, and I tell this story often. I put on when I speak or I put on a running camp and tell this story. At my state meet in cross country, my senior year, I made the mistake of going out too fast and I led the race. And all of a sudden, this pack of about 8 guys swallows me up. I feel terrible. It's a 2 mile race. At the mile mark, I'm dropping back. I go, that's it. I screwed up my last cross country race I'm ever going to run. And then I got mad at myself about a quarter mile later and says, this is ridiculous. And I said, I'm just going to go run up there, catch the pack. And if I die, if I don't finish, it doesn't matter. What happens is I get up there and I realize I start seeing they're hurting as bad as I am. And it was that lack of confidence that I always had, especially in high school, that they feel good, I don't feel good type of a thing. And I got up there and they're hurt and I passed a guy and then another guy. And all of a sudden I'm up with the 2 leaders and we're down to 200 meters to go. And I says, I think I might be able to, and I kicked both of them. And I ended up winning the state championship. And I go, if I hadn't made that decision to just go up there, and I got a college scholarship out of it, I went on and it completely changed my life. And I don't know if kids realize those years, those transformational years, that little decisions can have some huge consequences.
That's great. Yeah, there's windows of opportunity when we make decisions and things happen that have dramatic impacts. A friend of mine who was a runner I interviewed mentioned his main motivator was fear. This fear and lack of confidence mix is interesting to figure out because it comes and goes. Do you think there was a change in you after that race? Did
Yes.
that have a lasting impact?
Yeah, it absolutely did. Because then I realized I think I thought my races were out of my control, actually, until that point. Because I just always thought I can only run this fast or whatever. And it's beyond my ability to control it. Probably after that race, I realized there's a lot more that you can pull out of yourself if you're willing to attempt to. And yeah, it had a major change in my racing strategies and my confidence.
Let's talk about the transition to university then. How widely were you recruited or did you consider things? And what was the transition to a big program going from state champion to what when you arrived at university?
Yeah. That's the interesting thing is I was fortunate at Cleveland State. They were just starting a program. They had cross country for a few years, but it was not very competitive, but they had some money. And it turned out that somebody had not taken a scholarship. So this full scholarship, room, board, everything was available to me. I said, I can't pass this up. So I went and I struggled adapting to living in Cleveland after coming from a farm, but it worked out wonderfully eventually. But I went from a small high school, the smallest division in Ohio high schools. It used to be called single A. Now they do the numbers, but to a Division I university. And I was the first man on the team by over a minute up there. In my high school team, I had a pack of guys really close to me that pushed me. So it was a strange transition because there weren't many people there. And then fortune brought about every year we got a recruit or a transfer to come in until the point was my junior year. Mark Hunter transferred in from Kent State, and he and we didn't hit it off well to begin with. Then all of a sudden we realized, hey, we can help each other. He went on to do some huge things, and he really helped me a lot with my training, my confidence, my racing, everything. So that's the kind of people you meet, the kind of situations that you encounter. If you stick with it, it just can really bring the best out of you. And you talked about some of the other teams around, like the Edinburgh team. So these guys helped each other, and they used and helped develop their skills and their training. Everything came from that. I don't think you can do it by yourself.
What was your mileage like there in the 4 years at Cleveland State for cross country ballpark?
Yeah. We started off low mileage. The coach thought we were running a lot more than we did. We were bullying the coach on a lot of things. I was probably only doing 30 or 40 miles a week. But then the evolution there was by the time I ran my 5th year to stick around and run with Hunter another year, they redshirted me when he transferred his off year. So we both sat out, but we got into 100-mile weeks. So we're consistently doing 100-mile weeks at that point. And oh my gosh, how much stronger we became. I had my share of stress fractures, I'll admit. So you play that game, but it really made me much stronger. So that's after even college, I stuck pretty much with the 100-mile week routine and it worked out great for me.
How was it from your freshman year on doing the travel? How far afield did you go with Cleveland State to compete?
We started off mostly locally, and then when we got the more competitive teams, we did travel a decent amount. I remember in track, we'd go to Drake relays. Actually, honestly, we'd go to Notre Dame and cross country, and we reflect back on it. We realize now that I think a lot of our travel was depending on how good the fishing was in a nearby river for our coach. We drove back from Notre Dame one year, and I had to sit in the back of the van with my feet on some frozen, whatever they were, some fish that he'd wrapped up in a garbage bag. And he was always doing that. But really, we did travel quite a bit. I think I ran 4 national championships, Spokane, Washington for cross country in 77. And let's see, what else did we run? I ran a Eugene for the 78 outdoor track championships. Oh, in Illinois, Champaign, Illinois was the 76, I think.
Nationals.
75. Yeah, the Nationals were there. So I got to compete and we did quite a bit of traveling. It was wonderful because I hadn't traveled that much before then.
And some of those were flights. The West Coast, you were flying as a
Sure.
team.
Sure.
And how many people were on your traveling squad?
Cross country, it was the normal, if you made the top 7, you would travel. I think we'd taken all of it. So it's usually maybe top 8. What we do in track, it was always depending on how many were the various events that were, it hits a certain standard to travel. It was usually about maybe a dozen of us, something like that.
Let's talk about the competition and beneficial competition. Was it a rivalry? You and Mark Hunter, across your years that you ran together, how did you psychologically deal with that negotiation and competing at practice and competing as a teammate?
I mentioned how weak the program was at Cleveland State. It's strange to me now that I put a lot of emphasis on they had this most valuable runner that they give away at the banquet at the end of the season for Cleveland State. And I had won it my first 3 years. Now Hunter shows up and I wanted to win it my 4th year. And this was in 77. Hunter's going to end up at the end of the season. He's going to be the top American in the nation. He finished 4th out at Spokane in the Nationals behind Henry Rono, John Tracy, and Gerard Deegan, who were Kenyan Irish. And then he was 4th place, the first American. But that whole season, I'm competing with him and I beat him the first 4 races. So I said, okay, I'm going to get this most valuable. But it's crazy how and I look back and they go, why did you care about that? But that's how our whole careers develop. It's strange things like that. It motivate us to go after something. And then we change and say, okay, that was just a crazy goal to have. We really were rivals to begin with. I redshirted when he was in his transfer season and coach would throw us in some road races and we would just go head to head. And we could have run these together as a good workout, which a year later we were doing readily. We just loved to train and race with each other. But at that time, we disliked each other is probably what the best way to say it. But then there came a realization. I think we ran OU relays, Ohio University relays. We got a 10K together. Bill Haviland was in the race. And it was a pretty big race. And all of a sudden, I'm just hanging on to Hunter and Haviland. And we're starting to lap people. And I ended up, we get a lap to go. I think I took the lead. And then with about 300 meters to go, Hunter flies around, Haviland flies around. But we went 29:11, 29:13, and 29:15. And I don't think I'd been under 31 minutes before that. And so I made this huge drop in times. And I go, oh my God, this guy is really pulling me along, literally, in the race and in my training and everything else. They said, you quit worrying about whether you beat him or not, but use what he's offering as a teammate. And it did. It turned out probably from that point on that we really helped each other a great deal.
How were your personalities the same or different apart from track?
Mark was a little wild when he came to Cleveland State. He'd been with the Kent State crew that probably pushed the envelope in areas that shouldn't have been pushed. I think that's probably one of the reasons that he left Kent State and came to Cleveland State. I was probably the other end of the spectrum. I didn't drink at all. I led weekly Bible studies for the team. And Mark, at first, I think was a bit opposed to that. And then eventually, we really hit it off very well together. Eventually, we both transitioned a great deal, not just Mark. It was a lot me had to change as well. But those are the things that you talk about, those life-changing experiences when you meet somebody like that and you realize it's best for each of us if we meet the middle ground instead of keeping our old habits. And it was an incredible transition. And I'm very proud of the fact that because I could be very stubborn and not change at all, but I could see there was incredible benefits from being more like Mark in many ways.
How was the academics for you?
Yeah.
Balancing being a full-time athlete and a student.
I struggled. I wasn't the brightest guy, and Mr. Grant was my chemistry physics teacher back in high school. And he said, if you go and get your degree in chemistry and physics, your teaching degree, I'll retire and you can take my job. In fact, that was one of the reasons, and that's how I chose my major. So I did that, and I struggled a lot because there were some tough classes there, but I ended up doing pretty well and got out, and I did exactly that. He retired. I took his job and coached in my high school after that. But it was a struggle. In fact, I remember telling my coach, we were supposed to go to Cincinnati for a dual meet with the University of Cincinnati. Those used to be a big thing. The colleges, in high school also, a lot of dual meets, and now it's not really that way anymore. I told coach, I've got this lab. I've got to get done. I've got all this stuff. I said, I'm not going to go. And he says, Ted, I could take your scholarship away. I says, I don't care if I miss this lab. I'm not going to pass this course. And so we ended up, everything worked out fine, but I didn't go to the meet. And it's things like that that sometimes you have to make sacrifices one way or the other.
What was your vision of running during university, or what would happen once you finished?
I really, at this point, I'd fallen in love with running. And there's a number of reasons outside of my little atmosphere that I was in that are why. A number of those involved some of the elite athletes that were especially in the country at the time. I fell in love with these guys, Shorter, Rogers, Prefontaine, Waddle. It's just, I became a disciple of the sport. And even local guys, I followed the Edinburgh guys and the Eastern Michigan guys and all around the Oregon guys. You just read, I couldn't get enough of them. So I wanted to transition into something post-collegiate. And I didn't know remember back then there was very little opportunity to do anything post-collegiate. I think it was maybe the year I graduated that Athletics West formed. Now, I was not that caliber, but at least I could see that there were efforts being made to nurture the post-collegiate athlete. And that was good to see. And Hunter ended up going out and running for Athletics West. It was fun to follow that whole transition, but I wanted to do something, but I just didn't know when, where, how, and financially how you could do it because it was tough.
You've talked about your reflections on failures, and with time and experience, things look differently. What was your best success at Cleveland State? How did you feel about it at the time, what you accomplished?
Probably the best success instead of an individual race. Maybe the individual race would have been that 10K that I just described out at OU, but maybe the best success would have been just collectively seeing the program develop and the individuals around me. We went from really nobody was capable of breaking a 32-minute 10K like my freshman or sophomore years to we had a group of about 8 of us that were all 30-minute flat guys or better. That takes a lot of effort and teamwork. Seeing something like that progresses, it is really marvelous. It's just, you don't get that many opportunities to see something come together like that in our lives. And I was really thrilled about that.
When you left college, was there opportunities for racing and any sponsorship that came your way?
I was fortunate. There was a local This was just a neat guy. His name was Reno Starnoni. He just passed away this past year, but he was very much into running and he ran a local running store and that's another one of these evolutionary things. There weren't such things as running stores in the early 70s. And these started coming. Those were like our coffee shops. We'd go there and just hang out. And it was just a neat time to meet people. And I always wanted to just work at a running store. I think we all did. And it was just what I did for a while. Reno had a connection with Adidas and he got me in and I got to run on the Adidas national team. In fact, Craig Virgin was on that and I got to know Craig reasonably well. But we traveled together, went to Peachtree, and they gave us a lot of opportunities to get to travel. One thing led to another. I had some reasonably good races, and Nike offered me a better deal. So I left Adidas and went with Nike. And that's, again, a lot because of some of the local guys. Ron Addison was at one of the Nike reps, and he was a Cleveland guy. When I kept in contact, I think he was running for Athletics West at the time also. But just those little connections and how we all helped each other. Virgin and I still talk. He's a farm boy and he came to my farm once and looked at me and said, man, this is so much like my farm out in Lebanon, Illinois. You keep these connections, these people, we help each other. That's the way it should be, I think. Instead of competing so heavily that we hate our competition, we learn to accept them like the Hunter and I story and realize we're going to help each other and get through this thing and do the best we can.
That's such a good, healthy evolution of attitude, and I'm
Yeah.
sure it contributes to success. But did you find periods, everything's not even, everything can go up and down? Did that idea of confidence, did you reach a area where your confidence or fear came back for any period?
Yeah, when I reflect on my career, I was very confident in racing, especially like Ohio area races. I struggled when I traveled to compete well. And I think it was still that thing. Okay, I'm in Oregon now. These guys are better than me. Yeah, and I don't even mean the Oregon University of Oregon runners. I ran the Nike Marathon out there, and I ran bad. And I think it's a lot the same thing. I can't run with these guys. And even though I knew I could, somehow subconsciously, I think it would affect me. I didn't perform as well at some of the larger races as I thought that I could. Because if I could just run the same time, in Oregon or someplace that I ran, I would have done well. But I actually did. I ran the international cross country trials 4 or 5 times. And I think every one of those times they would take 9 on the team. Every one of those, I think my highest position was 11th place finish. And my worst position was, I think, 13th or 14th place finish. I was always knocking on the door, but never quite in there. But those were pretty good races for me. But I had a lot of just miserable Peachtree. I don't like the heat. Peachtree was always very, very hot. And I just always ran poorly there. But just fun experiences traveling, especially with a lot of those elite runners, good guys.
It's neat that you were such a fan of the sport while you were in the middle of it. You kept that with your coaching and pursuing information. It's fun, I think, for everybody who's going to listen to this to hear these names and races that
Yeah.
we were all fans of, whether we were able to compete there or we were just following like that. Let's talk about your high school and university coaches and when you thought, I am going to be a coach, and how the experiences with those two specifically informed how you became a coach and how you performed as a coach.
The impact that coaches have on youth just can't be overstated. It's just incredible the direction that they can provide to us. Boy, I'm a guy that really needed direction. I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing. And they provided that for me. And I thought, okay, I hope that I could do the same for some of the young kids because teachers provide a lot of direction. But when you get outside that classroom and you start telling guys, we're going to do 10 quarters today, I want them, they look at you like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. Then they get done and say, okay, it's a type of an experience where you realize you're doing something good and it's great for the youth, but it's also just great pulling teams together. I just always love to see kids that probably would never talk to anybody else in the hallways, the classroom. They get out there on the track and or go for a long run. We're going for a 6 or 8 mile run in high school. And all of a sudden they're all talking and they become best friends through that. And I can't run anymore, but people ask me what I miss. And I probably miss going on a 15-mile run and just talking the whole time to some of my buddies. Those were such enjoyable experiences, more so than the races, I think. It was just what a social community we developed and just wonderful.
You remember the earliest days running on the roads? My experience in a small town, Pennsylvania, would always have people hut one, hut two, thinking you're training for the army. How was the public perception
Yeah.
changed for
Yeah.
you by the time you started coaching?
I probably couldn't count how many people would say, "Okay, can I give you a ride? What happened?" They thought I was running because there was a crime involved or something. I don't know, but they didn't understand that. No, I just want to do this type of thing. But it did change a lot. In fact, but the first road race I ever knew about was not far from where I'm at now. And I had never attended. This was like mid 60s, but I would have been just in elementary school. But they would do this thing. It was a group of about a dozen, maybe 20 guys, and they would just run this 4-mile straightaway for a race. What they would do is pick who they thought was going to be the winner and give him the stopwatch. All right. No women allowed, of course, at this point in the running era. And if somebody passed this guy, he had to hand them the stopwatch because whoever wins the race has to get there and read the times off to everybody else. But that's how road racing started. And what you talk about the evolution of the sport, look what's happened. In the 70s was like that. I don't remember a race, in the early, like 1970 or the early 70s, that was bigger than maybe 100 people or a couple hundred people, that all of a sudden you started seeing these massive races come in. And I give credit to what Bowerman did by bringing over the linear theory and writing his book on jogging, and Shorter and Waddle in the 72 Olympics and what these guys did just started as something that completely changed the whole thing. And we were fortunate to be caught up in that. That was a huge deal for me to be able to see that I was part of something that was popular, because I wasn't necessarily the most popular person in high school or anything like that. But now I felt like I was doing something that people cared about.
Just like I hope that on this podcast, we're doing something that people care about. We're going to stop here with part 1 with Ted Rupe. Lots more stories, lots more history in the next episode, part 2 with Ted. I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.